This meeting is now being recorded.
So if you wanted to listen to any part of it or review the slides again, that recording will be made available on our website. And of course, please share that with any of your colleagues who maybe were not able to join us today. So today's webinar, we're excited to share with you the Alliance's recently developed draft monitoring and evaluation framework and strategy. So first we'll hear from our Director of Programs here, Sumi Mehta, who will just provide some context for the strategy and why it was commissioned. And then we'll hear from Eco Limited, the firm that we commissioned to help us in developing the strategy. And so they'll tell us about the process they undertook in developing the framework and the strategy and the recommendations and where they are now. And then, of course, tell us about those draft recommendations as well. So as I mentioned, we will be recording this, and then the recording will be available on our website under the resources section. I'm also going to mute everyone today, and we ask that you please keep yourself muted so we don't have any unwanted background noise or anything like that. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so we ask that you hold your questions until then. And then when we are ready for those questions, we ask that you relay those through the instant messenger function, which is located at the bottom left of the screen, instead of verbally asking those questions. You can also use that instant messenger function to communicate any questions or technical difficulties that you may be having with sound or your screen or something like that. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started with the presentations today, and I'll hand things over to Sumi Mehta.
Hello everyone. So I'm just going to give a very, very brief overview of where we're at in our monitoring and activities so far here at the Alliance. And let me just see for the next. Sorry, we're having a bit of technical difficulty. Okay. So I think as most of you know, most of our efforts here at the Alliance are really for M&A aimed at being able to measure the extent to which we are moving towards, as a sector, a thriving market for clean cookstoves and fuels, and also the extent to which we're going to achieve all of the social, economic, health, environmental benefits that we would like to see occurring as a result of adopting clean cooking technologies. So in this slide here, you just see a very, very simplified theory of change for the Alliance's activities, a very brief overview. And this just gives you an idea here of where we are at in terms of our M&E strategy. During the first phase of our efforts, our main intent was really to make sure that we could develop the framework and the strategy to be used moving forward. So we put a lot of emphasis in terms of developing some of the initial global and focused country strategies, refining our theory of change, and also trying to hone down the key outcomes, outputs and indicators that we would be used for measurement. And of course, we have to consider what types of resources and tools would be needed for implementation. And so now, as we move into the second phase of our efforts, where we're really scaling up, we'll also need to be able to track the progress as we scale up our efforts. And so we were actually very pleased to have Eco Limited respond to the RFP that we put out towards the end of last year, really asking for some assistance to really refine our strategy for M&E moving forward. Here you can see very briefly some of the accomplishments that we made during phase one at the different levels for M&E. Really, some work to harmonize the global tracking indicators for things like census and DHS, but also with CIFA and WHO, starting to work at the focus country level, thinking about what types of monitoring would be necessary for our partners as well as our grantees, and also thinking more carefully about how we're going to be able to track the innovation and growth of the clean cooking market, and also the adoption and impacts at the household level. And as I mentioned, during phase two, we'll really be emphasizing how we can track the progress on scale. So here you can kind of see a very rough guesstimate of the breakdown is going to be across these different levels as we think about monitoring efforts, market growth, and then also being able to model and measure impacts. And so I think with that, I would like to turn it over. I'm very pleased to have Eco Limited here on the phone, both Grant Ballard Termier as well as Ian Houseman representing the Eco Limited team, and they're going to essentially walk you through what they've put together for the finalization of the M&E global strategy and framework, although they will also put a little bit of emphasis as well on the national strategy for focus countries. But we're really using this as an opportunity to welcome all of you to have a look at what's been proposed so far, and then to provide any comments here so that we can further refine before we finalize our approach.
Great. So Ian and Grant, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sumi. And good day to all of you listening. I hope it will be an interesting discussion, and I'm sure it certainly will be. We will start with a number of slides that give this broad overview of all the aspects of the global M&E strategy, the framework, and some insights into the national strategies and action plans related to the action plans for the focus countries. Without any further ado, I'll just jump straight in. Sumi gave very well an overview of the context of the work that we are doing. This emphasis that GACC is giving as they move into phase 2 on driving investment, innovations, and operations. Our work since December last year has been looking at proposing a global M&E framework, which is what we will talk about today, the strategy as well, and the action plans. This work has been carried out by our team at ECO with inputs from a very broad range of stakeholders. These are from the health sector, from water, to learn from people who are working in empowerment, women's empowerment and gender, in diverse aspects of health as well, for example, HIV/AIDS, such like. So we have had inputs and consultations from a broad range of stakeholders as part of our team, also through interviews, meetings and workshops and such like. And the M&E framework and strategy, and all these documents are now undergoing the full public consultation, which this webinar is part of. We have a lot to cover in our session today, really starting from the mission and goals, the guiding principles, which I will outline in a moment, and then my colleague Ian will run through the strategy and the framework, and then either I will or a colleague of ours, Maggie Matinga, will run through the section on the country frameworks, if we manage to get her connected into the call. And then we will end with a brief discussion about the next steps. As Julie said right at the beginning, if you have questions as we go, just feel free to add them into the chat, and we'll either address them right there or when we get to the end. So, in terms of the mission and goal, the M&E strategy, what we are trying to do through the M&E strategy and framework, comes out of the Alliance's mission, strategic goal. The mission statement focuses on saving lives, improving livelihoods, empowering women, and preserving the environment. And you will see these 4 pillars perhaps recurring through the strategy and the framework as we present those. The strategic goal, as I think maybe everyone knows, really is the adoption of clean cookstoves and fuels of 100 million households by 2020. So this is the strategic goal the Alliance is working for, and is naturally a very critical focus of the M&E system. How do we measure the progress towards that adoption? And the M&E system also seeks to provide information and insights related to the contribution, which, as I'm sure you will all know, is an extremely complex aspect to understand the extent of the activities of the alliances, the Alliance Secretariat and its partners in contributing to the progress that is made globally. So these three really frame the questions that are addressed within the framework, within and the strategy. These three questions and the key questions for the M&E system are shown in this diagram. The three questions are the role of the Alliance, the progress towards the 100 million households by 2020, and the wider impacts on a thriving market has been three key questions. And the establishment of the progress from the Alliance Secretariat's activities, which is shown in the green box on the left. The Alliance Secretariat has activities, and the Alliance partners are all undertaking activities that lead towards the increase in the number of cleaner stoves adopted, shown in the red box in the middle. And that increase in number of cleaner stoves adopted is the goal of the work of the Alliance. The M&E answering the question shown in the middle question mark, progress towards 100 million by 2020, this target entails measuring that increase in the number of cleaner stoves adopted. And the four pillars that I mentioned on the previous slide of health, environment, livelihoods, and women's empowerment are captured in the purple box on the right. Of the wider impacts of the thriving market, the overall impacts that the increased number of stoves adopted would contribute to. So these are the visualization of the key questions. In setting out this work, starting it and implementing it, we've tried to ensure that we are reinforcing the following guiding principles. Of great importance in the considerations was the possible burden that reporting to the Alliance would have on partners and on other stakeholders. And so we have sought throughout the strategy and framework to avoid an undue burden on those reporting. Many of the stakeholders we've consulted with so far have said, we have so many reporting requirements, adding extra ones would be very stressful to us. So everyone is reporting to their donors, and so this factor of the undue burden on those reporting is really a critical principle that we have tried to address. The value that we try and get from the M&E system, we recognize that in many cases people see M&E as an extra cost center, something additional that must be done that takes away resources from the core business. But we have tried to ensure that the framework strategy for the M&E system supports learning. It supports the decision-making that could be made to improve the quality of what is being done, to facilitate a management approach that can adjust to what is being learned from the market. So this has been an important principle as well. These aspects, also the participatory types of approaches, flexibility, and using good practices for systems and standards have all been incorporated into the strategy and framework that has been developed. Now, this rather complicated slide about the approach is really here to show how the various components that we're talking about, I'm interchangeably using framework and strategy and plan and system, how these all fit together. And our starting point of foundation in this conceptual framework has been the starting from an understanding of the theory of change, how the Alliance goes about bringing about this change that it is trying to foster in the market. So we start from the theory of change at the bottom of the diagram, and then the results framework emerges from the theory of change. If this is the change that we're seeking to bring about, what are the steps along the way of that theory where we can identify indicators and be able to measure and assess the changes that are brought about within the system represented by the theory of change. So component one of our work is the results framework. In the large box you can see the global and partners and funds. This is the M&E plan communicated in the strategy document. And this looks at how one measures does M&E globally. Within that there's the Alliance Secretariat, which is implementing, which is funding that it provides and funding that it enables. So the funding is partly activity of Secretariat, partly enabled by the Secretariat. The work of partners and the focus countries, all covered within this overall strategy. So this communicates in graphic form how the various components of what we have been doing fit together. I'll pass on to Ian at this stage to talk in more in detail about the strategies you can see here and the results framework. Ian.
Thanks, Grant. I hope you can all hear me. As Grant mentioned, I will be talking about two of the components, the global strategy and the global framework, before handing back to Grant or Maggie, who will then talk about the third component, which is the set of strategies and action plans for the focus countries. As you can see from this slide, just to give an overview of the strategy, it really seeks to answer the questions that are highlighted in bold there, the questions of why, what's the purpose of of M&E, and for whose benefit is it being conducted. The questions of what and how, in other words, what is going to be measured and exactly how is that going to take place. And these questions, the what and how, are actually form the basis of the M&E framework, which I'll talk about in shortly. It's also important for the strategy to address the question of who are the key stakeholders in this, what are the roles and responsibilities to be fulfilled by the key players in the whole range of M&E activities. And the final question that needs to be addressed is a when, a phased timeline for the implementation of the strategy, which will be developed in consultation with all of the key stakeholders. Just a quick overview of what the framework consists of. It provides a much more practical description, if you like, of how M&E should be conducted, and as I said before, it addresses the what and how questions that were raised in the previous slide. So it really describes what needs to be measured by whom and on what kind of timescale. The framework is based upon the theory of change, which itself is a visual map of the changes that are expected to occur as a result of the Alliance and its partners' activities. And the framework also spells out in detail what the key indicators are that will be tracked, and provides a detailed specification for each of those indicators in terms of the time frame, the methods by which the data will be collected, and the sources from which data will be obtained. You'll see, just to backtrack slightly, the global strategy and the global framework are each outlined in much more detail in two PDF files, which I believe you have access to under the file library. You'll see throughout both of those documents several different formats for the theory of change. That they're all based on the theory of change as outlined by Sumi, and it comes from the Alliance business plan. But in various places, we've sort of rearranged, reconfigured the theory of change visually somewhat to make it more appropriate for the points that we wish to illustrate. But I think you'll agree that in every case the theory of change is broadly consistent throughout. You know, we're not proposing different theories of change; they're just merely different ways of depicting the same thing. And here is a very, very simplified version of the theory of change, in order to make it fit practically within one slide. We've stripped out a lot of the detail. So broadly from left to right, the theory of change depicted here shows activities on the left which result in outputs. Those outputs are used by the intended target groups to generate direct outcomes, and then those outcomes lead to indirect outcomes, and also the four pillars of the wider impacts that are desired on the far right. As I said, there's a lot of detail missing from there. In some of the other documents, you'll see, for example, that there are quite complex chains of causality implicit between the links in this theory of change as it's depicted here. Those are spelled out somewhat more detail in one of the depictions of the theory of change that's provided in the M&E framework document. And also depicted in that document is another way of visualizing the theory of change, which spells out in more detail some of the assumptions that are implicit in making the logical step from one link in the chain to the next link. As I said, that detail has been omitted here for the sake of practicality. So, in order to describe the strategy, I'd like to break it down into identifying three levels at which M&E takes place that are outlined in this slide. So the first level, these three levels broadly go from the more directly under the influence of the Alliance through to the less direct influence. So the first level is what we've called the products and services that the Alliance Secretariat offers to its partners. These consist of the various funding mechanisms, SPARC, PIF, WEF, as it's described there, the support that the Alliance Secretariat provides for the development of international standards, the enterprise capacity building activities that they engage in, and the various brokering and facilitating activities that they also engage in to promote investment and to foster partnerships. Then there's a whole set of different, for want of a better word, events that the Alliance Secretariat organises: conferences, workshops, webinars, online discussion forums. And finally, there's the Alliance Secretariat knowledge management activities. So that set of products and services are all very much under the direct influence of the Alliance, and so they have a very high degree over how M&E at that level can be conducted. The next level is the level of the voluntary reporting of results by Alliance partners. Because it's voluntary, there's less direct influence by the Alliance over whether this data actually flows or not. The Alliance can have the Secretariat can have an indirect influence through appropriate incentivizing and capacity building, for example. And I'll discuss some of those sorts of factors a bit later. But the sorts of data that are that we're talking about here that arise from the annual results survey are primarily data on stove and fuel sales, but also some data on value chain, for example, numbers of individuals employed at various stages in the stove value chain, and the breakdown of that employment data according to gender. And for the stove and fuel sales, the data we would hope would provide some sort of geographical specificity, which in turn would enable the Alliance to infer some information about the particular context into which the stove sales have taken place. And then the third level is the level where the Alliance really has much less direct influence, and that's the global level, where the Alliance will work in partnership with various global initiatives, and we're talking here primarily about sustainable energy for all, and also the WHO initiatives, and also using its reach and its influence to drive the global agenda for research into the broader impacts of stove adoption. So in the next set of slides, I'll look at each of these three levels in a little bit more detail. So first of all, we have the Alliance's products and services. Again, I've divided these into three categories here. For the first category, we're dealing with the M&E of the activities being undertaken by the recipients of Alliance funds. For each of these funds, it's important to base M&E on a separate theory of change for each individual fund. In other words, it's important to have a picture for each fund of what outputs the grant recipients, the fund recipients, are intending to produce with the funds that they receive. Who those outputs are actually aimed at, who are the intended users of those outputs, and what change is the use of this output intended to bring about among those target groups, and also what the broader impacts of those resulting from those outcomes will be. It's also important to bear in mind that one person's impact may be another person's output or outcome. So although we haven't depicted it graphically here, where these individual theories of change for these separate funds fit into the big picture is that very often the broader impacts resulting from the activities undertaken by fund recipients, from the point of view of the fund itself, those are impact, either indirect outcomes or impacts. But from the point of view of the bigger theory of change picture for the Alliance as a whole, those might actually constitute outputs or outcomes at the big picture level. So for fund recipients, it's actually possible for the Alliance to be very prescriptive about the types of M&E that are to be undertaken. They have direct influence over the fund recipients, and they can specify exactly what types of monitoring and evaluation should be conducted. But it's also important to recognise that the fund recipients may be relatively small organisations with limited capacity, and so those M&E demands should be defined in bearing this context in mind, and the Alliance would also be available to offer capacity building where that's required. I'm just hearing some background noise. I don't know whether. Okay. So the other next category of Alliance products and services is the work that they're conducting on international standards, and in this for this type of activity, it's important for the Alliance not only to track the capacity of the testing centres themselves, but also to recognise that unless the standards developed are actually used by someone, then no impacts will result. So as well as tracking the improved capacity of testing centres, it will also be important for the Alliance to just track the extent to which the standards are being adopted, what fraction of stove models on the market are actually undergoing testing and certification according to those standards. And then for the third set of the Alliance's products and services, it's kind of all the other items which haven't been covered by the first two bullet points. So again, it's important. So these are things like the events, for example, that the Alliance offers, and also the enterprise capacity building services, and the fostering and facilitation of partnerships and financing. And for all of these, again, it's desirable to track directly the number of partners that are actually accessing these resources. But more importantly than that, I think it's important for using follow-up surveys of those users to try and track what use was actually made of the resource, and what outcome resulted from that use. So this slide relates to the second of the three levels of at which M&E takes place, and this is the partner results monitoring. The sort of fundamental, basic type of data that we would like to obtain from this level of monitoring is data on stove and fuel sales. Almost as important is data on the activities within the Clean Stoves value chain, which would enable tracking of the levels of employment offered within the Clean Stoves value chain, and the as I said previously, the gender breakdown of the people employed. But the most important thing to remember is this is voluntary, is reported voluntarily by partners. I'll come on in the final bullet point to discuss some of the implications of that. But this is actually one of the data on stove and fuel sales, and the data from the Clean Stoves value chain are actually some of the few indicators that are actually directly measured. Many of the other indicators are modelled. So the example here of a model indicator is that of the stove adoption level. So stove sales don't necessarily equate to stove adoptions. In order to determine how many stoves are adopted, a simple model would be necessary. The outputs from that model take two different forms, depending on what that output is intended to be used for. So for the purpose of tracking progress towards the adoption of the goal of 100 million households adopting cleaner cooking solutions by 2020, a simple yes/no answer is sufficient. Has a household adopted, or has it not adopted? For the more precisely quantified impacts, the four pillars that Grant mentioned, the health, environment, livelihoods, and women's empowerment impacts, a simple yes/no answer is not sufficient. A much more precisely quantified output is required from this model, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail a bit further on. And just the final point to make there is that the way in which adoption is conceptualized needs to be aligned as far as possible with existing frameworks, especially the Sustainable Energy for All framework. There's a lot more detail provided in I think it's Annex D to the M&E framework document that provides an overview of what these models would look like. I think it's beyond the scope of our work to formulate a detailed specification of the models. So what we've done in the M&E framework document is to provide a broad overview of the characteristics of the models and some ideas about how they might work. But of course, the detailed development is a whole big assignment in its own right. So as I said, the outputs from these models will provide a yes/no answer, which will enable the progress towards the global goal to be tracked, and also provide information about the levels of energy savings that have resulted from the adoption of cleaner cooking solutions, and also provide estimates of the reduction in emissions that have resulted from that, and the reductions in the air pollution, which in turn will provide inputs into broader models for estimating the environmental and health impacts. As I mentioned before, the reporting of data through this annual results reporting mechanism is voluntary. So some attention needs to be paid towards how to ensure that the data that's obtained is robust and reliable. First of all, to incentivize partners to want to engage in the voluntary reporting. Some ideas that we spell out in more detail in the strategy documents are one possibility is to provide partners with a value-added flow of data in return for the data that they provide, subject to whether the partners themselves would be interested in this flow of value-added data, and also whether it would actually turn out to be feasible. What we envisage here is, for example, once the models that we've described above are developed, that a partner providing data on stove sales, for example, could receive in return some data back from the Alliance on what the broader impacts of those stove sales are likely to be in terms of environmental and health impacts, for example. Another way in which partners might be incentivized is this one's a little bit more risky, is to make access to some of the products and services that the Alliance provides conditional on their participation in the results survey. The reason I say that is risky is because there's a danger that if that type of approach is used, that all that will happen is that the flow of data, there's no assurance that the data that would result from that would be robust and reliable. There might be an incentive for partners to be somewhat lax in the reporting of data merely so that they can gain access to the products and services that they desire. Then another category of incentivization that could be explored for the longer term is the use of competitions and awards among partners to actually recognise their contribution in terms of the data they've provided and reward it, recognise it and reward it through an annual, for example, an annual awards ceremony. But I think it's important when thinking about incentivization that really the strongest incentivization, I think, is to engender a sense of common purpose among partners, so that partners simply want to provide data. They share a common sense of common purpose, and that in itself, one would hope, would strong incentivization for them to wish to participate in the annual reporting of results. So the second of the three sub-bullet points there is capacity building. I've alluded to this already, that for the direct recipients of Alliance Secretariat funds, it might well be necessary to provide a capacity building service to enable them to meet the requirements for M&E under those funds. But also for partners that are not in direct receipt of Alliance funds, I think we envisage a capacity building service provided as part of the broader enterprise capacity building that the Alliance already provides. This would again fall into the three categories that the Alliance already specifies for their broader enterprise capacity building activities, and that's a general capacity building service, which would take the form of online tools and best practice guides, for example, for M&E. A more targeted service, which would take the form of workshops, targeted workshops. And then for those partners who are engaged in large complex projects, it would be desirable for a more individualized M&E capacity building service to be offered in partnership with the whichever donor is supporting that activity. Then the final bullet point on this slide is again a final sort of component of ensuring reliable and robust data is verification and validation. By validation, we are talking about a process that can be semi-automated, that is there merely to ensure internal consistency of the data. Semi-automated, but with a human-based plausibility check on the data as well. And then by verification, we are referring to a more extensive and more complex activity where to ensure that the reported data actually is a true reflection of reality. Again, for recipients of Alliance Secretariat funds, this verification process could be part of the general evaluation that takes place of those funded activities. For partners that are not in direct receipt of Alliance funding, it's somewhat more difficult because the Alliance doesn't have necessarily any right of access to the raw data that those partners are producing. So we would advocate that unless there is a strong reason for believing that there's some question about the veracity of the data, that the more detailed verification checks are not conducted as a general rule, only if there's a particular reason for wanting to check the veracity of the data. So I'm just aware of the fact that time is running short, so I'll have to speed up a bit, I think. At the global level, as I mentioned before, it's very important for the Alliance to ensure that its activities, M&E activities, are aligned with the key global players, which in this case are primarily Sustainable Energy for All and World Health Organization. The global tracking framework already sets out an approach for defining and measuring access, but access is not exactly the same thing as adoption. And in the M&E strategy, we discuss a couple of examples of ways in which there might be some, let's say, lack of alignment between what SE for All defines as being access and what the Alliance would wish to define as being adoption. So I don't believe it's going to be possible to exactly align the two definitions, but certainly it would be possible and desirable and essential, I would say, to ensure that the data requirements for SE for All's access tracking and also the Alliance's adoption tracking, that make sure that those two sets of data requirements are harmonized and aligned with each other. The WHO Global Household Energy Database currently tracks dependence on. I'm just getting a little chat from Grant saying to speed up a bit. Okay, maybe I'll skip quickly over these last few bullet points because I think I'm running a bit short of time. So. And it's pretty self-evident that I think the bullet points there spell out exactly what's required. So I'll skip over the rest of that slide now just to speed things up a bit. And move on to the results framework, which, as I said right at the beginning, is a much more practical description of the what and how questions of M&E, what needs to be monitored, how it's going to be monitored. There are three main components to it. The global goal of the number of households adopting clean stoves. There are two indicators that come under that we've defined under that address that global goal. The second part is the Alliance's mission. These are the four impacts, the four pillars that Grant mentioned at the beginning: environment, health, livelihoods, and women's empowerment. So within those four categories, there are a total of 10 indicators defined. And then the third class of results is the relating to the Alliance's value propositions, of which there are 6 categories, 6 different value propositions. and we've specified 13 indicators that fall into that category. So, as I mentioned previously, some of these indicators are measured directly, and a minority are measured directly, and the majority are modelled. The annexes B and C of the M&E framework document specify provide a detailed specification of the indicators that are to be measured, and then some conceptual guidelines for how we think the models for the modelled indicators would look are provided in Annex D of the M&E framework document. So we have 25 indicators altogether defined there, split between those three broad categories, and subdivided into 11 more detailed categories. There's no way we can go through all of those now. We just simply don't have the time. So what the next few slides do is provide an illustration of some examples of some of these indicators. So at the global level, there are just two indicators. One is I'll go in the opposite order to the way they're presented here. One is the number of clean stoves sold, which we're referring to as G2, and then from that indicator then forms input data into the modelling. That's a measured indicator. That indicator provides an input into the model, which is used to derive the G1 indicator, which is the number of households adopting clean cooking solutions. As I mentioned before, we've tried to design this as far as possible to be consistent with other systems, the SC for All Global Tracking Framework and the GIZ NDEV, for example. I don't think it's going to be practical to completely align the concept of adoption with SC for All's concept of access, but as far as possible, the two will not be incompatible with each other. The model for deriving G2 obviously needs to take into account factors such as the lifetime of the device and the rate at which it in turn defines the rate at which the cooking technology needs to be replaced. It also takes into account factors such as the likelihood that a household having adopted the technology will then subsequently abandon it, and also the likelihood that a household having adopted the technology will upgrade to an even better, more superior technology during the monitoring period. I won't go into any more detail about the model there, because as I say, a much more detailed discussion is available in the M&E framework document in the Annex D. Just a quick word on our. We'd like to provide support to the idea. It's not for us to tell the Alliance how the concept of clean should be defined, but we would certainly like to provide support to the idea that the definition of clean should be successively tightened through the three phases of the Alliance's business plan. And this is purely for illustrative purposes. As I say, we're not. It's not our role to tell the Alliance how clean should be defined, but this provides an illustration of the way that the concept of clean might be tightened through the different phases of the business plan. So at the beginning, in the first phase, anything except tier 0 and tier 1 is defined as clean, and then by the final phase, the concept of clean requires use of blend fuels and or depending on whether the cook stove has a rating, a tier 4 stove under the IWA definitions. So the next category of indicator is related to the Alliance mission, to these four pillars, the four impacts. And as I say, there are 10 indicators under here that are described here, two under health, 4 under livelihoods, 2 under women's empowerment, and 2 under environment. And again, just as an example of these are the 2 health indicators that we have defined. Both are modelled. both use as inputs into the model the detailed output from the adoption model that I've described previously. So the two indicators are the number of disability-adjusted life years saved as a result of the cleaner stove adoption. You'll see from the detailed description of the models in the M&E strategy that clearly, in order to model this quantity, there needs to be information available on the current spectrum of cooking technologies that are in use in the location where the cleaner stoves are sold and adopted. And the second health-related indicator is, as described there, it relates to health effects in children under 5 in the targeted community. Just a quick word to say that again, a lot of work is already taking place relating to health impacts, and we have things like, for example, the HAPIT model, which appears to provide a very valuable potential starting point for the use of for the modelling of health impacts. But those sorts of issues are explored in more detail in the M&E framework, in the M&E strategy and the framework documents. Just quickly to finish off, the Alliance has 6 value proposition, and we've defined indicators, a total of 13 indicators within those value propositions that are described here. And sorry, under one of those value propositions, the one relating to standards, we've specified 3 indicators that are described here. So first is the level of awareness of standards. Second is the extent to which those standards are actually being used, and the third is the effect of the use of those standards in terms of the level of activity taking place within the testing centres, the number of stoves, number of stoves tested, number of inquiries that they process, and the amount of revenue they earn from testing. Apologies for having to rush through the last few slides there, but I think it's time to hand back to Grant now, who will begin looking at the focus countries.
Thank you so much, Ian. I think we're actually going to pass it over to Maggie Matinga from the Eco Limited team.
Okay.
And again, thank you for being so thorough, but let's be mindful of time because we would like to save a lot of time for some discussion. But thank you, Ian. And now, Maggie, I'll pass it over to you. I'm unmuting you now. Maggie, are you there?
Yes. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, hi.
Right. Okay, so I'll quickly just get right into it. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the Alliance has got 7 focus countries, and it's Guatemala just having joined. And each of these focus countries, at least the focus countries that are there before Guatemala, have a country action plan, which is a specification of what, as a country, they are going to do and how much they're going to contribute to the Alliance's goals.
Sorry, Maggie, could you just speak directly into your microphone? Sorry, it's just a little hard to hear you.
Right. Is that any better?
Yes, thank you.
Hello?
Yes,
right.
That's better.
Right. So, yes, we have had participated in workshops in Kenya and Ghana where Alliance members on the ground have been sort of clarifying their ideas and clarifying their action plans on how they want to move forward. And we have been using this workshop to really think through the theories of changes, to think through the country strategies and how they're going to go about, and at the same time making sure that they're consistent with the global strategy. At this moment, we have some feedback, or the beginnings of feedback coming from Ghana, and we're still waiting for Kenya's feedback. The process at the moment is that we're going to, after us having going through the draft strategy and the theory of change in combination with the workshop, we've sent it back, so to say, to the countries so that there's country ownership, so that they can comment, they can adjust according to the realities that they see on the ground. So this is a process that we are going through at the moment, and we're beginning to get some feedback already from the country partners. And so in terms of, like I said, we've participated in 2 workshops, and we've gone through the zero strategies of 2 countries, that's Kenya and Ghana. With Kenya, their focus is a target of 5 million households by 2020, which would then contribute to the alliance goal of 100 million. And these activities will be led by the Clean Cookstoves Association of Kenya, who will then support their partners in meeting their goals in monitoring and evaluation, and really take that leading role in monitoring and evaluation. In Ghana, the target is 4 million households, but also Ghana has had, the Ghanaian government has a target of 50% LPG by 2020, which is also part of this action plan to have sort of a symbiotic relationship between what GACO wants to achieve, supporting the government, and also whatever the government will achieve or try to put in place to meet this 50% LPG target, supporting what GACO wants to achieve. And overall, both of these countries, as with the other focus countries, they are still very much aligned to the goals of the alliance, which is enhancing demand, strengthening strategies, and fostering an enabling environment, but doing it in a way that is very much country-specific. Very much looking at what are the situations, what are the barriers in country, what is realistic for a country to do. So what will be monitored in these countries? The first is the progress and performance, if you want, of the various actors and various members that are part of the alliances in the 2 countries. So in Kenya, that would be the CCAK, and in Ghana, that would be the GACO. And this would be monitoring the suppliers, how much of their activities are contributing to enhancing, to strengthening supply, monitoring the consumers, supporting the consumers. For example, consumer awareness is one issue that has been identified in both countries. Looking at affordability issues for consumers, the suppliers, maybe looking at distribution networks, and also policymakers looking at what can be done in policy, how much, for example, how much policy is moving forward to create an enabling environment. In both countries, one issue, for example, has been the issue of tariffs of imported clean cooking technology or companies of clean cooking technology. So those are the issues that will be monitored in terms of the members of the local alliances. Then you also have the monitoring of partner engagement. Obviously, the alliances like CCAK and GACO, and indeed even the alliance at a global level, they are actually depending on a range of partners to achieve their results. So having those partners engage and focus on common goals, having the tools aligned, the monitoring tools and methodologies where possible aligned is a key part of that engagement. Then we see strongly that a specific engagement strategy will be important for each of the focus countries. And obviously, once you have the engagement strategies, you want to monitor it to see, what's being achieved with the engagement, what value does the engagement add to the goals and the objectives of the alliance. The other aspect that also the activities of the local alliances that have to be monitored. So monitoring the activities of CCAK, monitoring the activities of GACO. For example, if they intend to commission research, if they intend to support the in-country members, their members with tools, their templates, or engagement activities, monitoring, that's the second part of monitoring. The third part of monitoring then is to say, well, after all these activities and all these interactions, what has actually happened at a sort of national level? And the two aspects to that, the first aspect is that there will be activities that will happen and that will change the clean cooking sector, whether or not the allowance is there. This could be as a result of demographic changes, increasing urbanization, increasing income, or economic shocks that could affect clean cooking adoption. And there, by knowing this, then we can see what is the impact that the allowance is having in country, what are the external benefits and so on and so forth, and how is the country as a whole changing towards the country target. So there's sort of three distinctive parts of activities, types of activities to be monitored. Now, the key issue then is what's monitored when and how. The first thing is the alliance partners, the local alliance partners or members. So these would be the local producers, the distributors, your NGOs and promoters and so on and so forth. And for them, what we envision is to have templates for reporting that they can then fill in on a quarterly basis if they are getting funding from any of the funding mechanisms that the alliance has, or yearly funding. So yearly reporting, which is limited to those that may not be getting funding, and therefore it's really an extra burden for them to report on a quarterly basis. One of the issues is that, of course, a lot of the partners, because they're already involved in the clean cooking sector, they already have their own monitoring tools. They might already have their own monitoring templates. So critical to that process, to that reporting, is to find out what's already being reported, how is it being reported, how is it compatible or not compatible with what the alliance is intending to report. So, for example, the models and the measured indicators that Ian was talking about, are they compatible? The names may be the same, but the methodology is different, and therefore how do we bring them together? Then there's the midterm evaluation that is expected of all partners at 3 years into the project. They're around 2017, and then the end-line evaluation. The national alliances, such as GACO or CAK, they would have to, the monitoring, quarterly monitoring that they would have to undertake, and of course annual reporting as well, and as the partners' midterm evaluation and end-line evaluation. So what we really would see is that the partners would also report to, so the members at local level, national level, would be reporting to the national alliances, so GACO and CCAK, who can then also bring that information together. Very important at national level, surveys at the national level to figure out what the baseline is, where the baseline is not available, or where the baseline is unclear. And we hope that this will be done at the beginning, of course, and then at the end to check the status against the baseline. And then there's the reporting of the alliance, and we see this very much also, that the success of the M&E strategy at country level also very much depend on not just a downward, upward reporting or monitoring and evaluation, but also top-down, sort of an accountability from the alliance reporting also to their partners on the ground at national level, what the results have been. and this would be at with the use of their annual survey results. An issue that obviously came up that's very important is the issue of capacity, looking at capacity not just in terms of skills, but also in terms of resources to do what alliances or national level alliances need to do. A couple of questions that still need to be answered, and this needs to be answered ideally at a national level, but obviously with support of the Global Alliance. How will this capacity M&E look like? Do we want a unit at national level? So would GACO have its own unit? Where would it be located? In some countries, it might be wise to be located with a government. In other countries, it might not be practical. So these are issues that at a national level, as they consult, as the partners and the alliances consult, they can really begin to think what are the implications of the locations of the separate units. And looking through what has to be monitored, obviously, it's a lot, the resources cannot be underestimated. Doing a baseline at a national level will take quite a bit of money. And so how will these funds be mobilized? How will local alliances mobilize their own funding? Do they have the capacity to mobilize their own funding? And what are the realistic targets for this funding mechanism? Hello? 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 So just to finish up, at the moment we the process, like I said, the process of consultation at national level is ongoing. We expect the national level to really look at their national situations and provide feedback or much more concrete details on what are the assumptions and risks in countries, what are their main targets. A big issue that has to be thought through is the fantastic society impact that we want to look at. Are they in a position to look at all these society impacts, livelihoods, women's empowerment, gender empowerment, environment? Is there a preference for one over the other, and then how do we deal with this? And of course, which partners can be brought in, should be brought in to engage and consult with. So in the next few days, we'll continue to be getting that feedback. And just supporting our country partners with that process. I'll give back to Grant now.
Great. Thank you so much, Maggie. Grant, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Well, thank you, everyone, for your patience with this. We are a bit over time. I would just say that we're very much now in consultation with draft documents, which will be shared with all the participants. Now you can see the process on that slide, and your comments are very welcome now and by email or by Skype, any time up until the 3rd of July. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. As Grant mentioned, we do have a public consultation process that's open now, but if you have any questions right now, you can go ahead and type those into the instant messenger function, and we'll try and address some of those today. So maybe I'll just start with a question that was already submitted in case people missed it in the chat window. Someone had asked, can this M&E framework, specifically the part focusing on the Third Alliance question, eventually be used to measure and report on the co-benefits of clean cooking projects developed under the existing carbon standards? And if so, will this framework be publicly available? And so Sumi had entered a short reply, but maybe she just wants to share that with everyone.
So the question, I mean, and I think this gets to this broader question of the extent to which we're really going to try to make sure that our kind of modeled as well as measured benefits focus on all of the impacts that we're looking at will be, to the extent possible, consistent with existing carbon standards in the carbons market on that side, but also different methods that are kind of acceptable, particularly as we move forward with a lot of the interest in being able to look at on the social impact investing side and looking at the social health and other benefits of adopting clean cooking. So we are making sure that we are, as far as possible, being able to be consistent with other frameworks.
Great. It looks like we have some more questions coming in here. One just on where these documents will be available. I'll actually send a version to everyone who registered for the webinar, or when you signed in. If you included your email, I'll send you a version of the framework and strategy documents so you can review those. And then you should also be able to see them on the screen now, the first two PDF documents. And then the recordings of the webinar are available on our website under the Resources tab. And of course, if you have any questions accessing those, you can email us using the info@cleancookstoves email address. So we have a question from Faustina Bokiai. She says, GACO has reviewed the draft strategy for Ghana and thinks it's not aligned to the country plan. What do you say? I don't know. Do you want to take that one? Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
That is not aligned to the country action plan. Hello?
Yes,
so can you be more specific in what way?
Yeah, so I think we need some more specificity on that one. So maybe we'll move on to another question now, and maybe we can just address that one to Faustina directly.
But we should just say, I mean, the whole approach was really intended for the consultants to work very intensively with the groups in country and the various stakeholders there to make sure that because the M&E framework has to be consistent with what the country action plans are proposing. I mean, that's I would say the number one most important thing that we need to consider here. There was a meeting of several stakeholders when we had our group of kind of stakeholder activities in Ghana. So I think that this suggests that we need to do a little bit more follow-up to make sure that things are really well aligned. Faustina, we'd love to hear more about this from you.
So we'll follow up directly. Another question, when do you expect the M&E framework to be operational?
Right, and so we are planning for having to have the entire framework operational really once we finalize it over the next couple of weeks here, pending feedback from our broader group of stakeholders, that it would be operational by the time that we move into phase 2 of our efforts, so later on this year.
Okay, thank you. And then Sumi, another question about maintenance of stoves that you might want to take. So selling a stove is one thing, maintaining it over 2 to 30 years will drive real impact. Many stoves only last 2 years before the efficiency benefits break down. So how will you account for that?
Right, and this is something I think that's very much on our radar when we look at actually the difference between monitoring the growth of the market and actually looking at being able to estimate the benefits and the societal impacts that we would be able to achieve, whether it's efficiency and environmental impacts or the health impacts. All of these impacts are much more dependent on the extent to which we can evaluate the intensity of adoption. So that's something that we're very much aware of, and something that we are really considering how to make recommendations to better enable people to do that.
Great. And then Ian and Grant and Maggie, please jump in if you would like to provide any additional comments on any of these questions as we go along, if they're not directed at you. We have a question about the fuel development issue. Again, I think that one's a fairly specific one, and we can follow up directly with you on that one. We've recently hired a new staffer who is really dedicated to the fuels issue, so we'll be sure to connect you with her. Someone asked, will there be any consideration of maintaining data on stoves that also generate biochar? Oh.
Yeah, and here I think, we'll have, of course, a more generalizable list of recommendations. Exactly what kind of data would you be looking for here? Because we would be able to, separate out the types of stoves that would generate biochar as a separate category, but then it would be curious to know kind of what additional information you're interested in here.
Okay. So maybe another specific follow-up. And we'll keep track of all of these and follow up with people directly. Alignment with the assessment of SE for all outcomes was briefly mentioned. It was said that the full alignment may be difficult. Can we be back briefly on these difficulties, and which are they?
Right. And so I think here, and the idea is that we are really focusing in as we try to get a sense of, getting a better handle of the scale-up of the kind of uptake and then the adoption of clean fuels and technologies. The CEPA framework is also very interested in looking at adoption. I think that we've had some challenges, frankly, in terms of being able to figure out what types of measures they would be comfortable with in terms of being able to assess adoption via household survey instrumentation, and the extent to which we feel that there may be more intensive assessments required, particularly when we're looking at the extent to which people are adopting in terms of getting a better handle on stove use and on the mixed use of different technologies within a household in order to be able to better estimate, particularly for the environmental and health benefits.
Great. Thank you, Sumi. And then another specific follow-up on the biochar question, but we'll go ahead and follow up directly on that. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? We'll wait a few more minutes.
If I could just perhaps stress at this stage
Sorry, Grant, we can't hear you. Sorry, Grant, we can't hear you right now. I'm just going to address Faustina. Added another question about funding for M&E activities, and this is, of course, the place that we're really focused in on at the moment in terms of trying to figure out the resources that would be necessary for actually carrying this out.
Grant, do you want to try again? You should be unmuted now.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that these documents are drafts for comments, and so please do feedback your thoughts, your comments and suggestions on it directly to me or to the Alliance. and in the case of Ghana or Kenya, the consultation is underway, so the process of ensuring it's aligned, this point that Christina was making, is a process that is right now underway. We have not produced the final version, we have produced the zero version, the very first draft of the country strategies that would need to be adapted according to the inputs from Ghana, from Kenya.
Great, thank you, Grant, for that additional clarification. So as we mentioned before, we'll go ahead and send these documents around to those who included their email when they joined the webinar. So please share those with anyone who you think might be interested. We'll also make them available on our website, as well as the recording of the webinar, which will also be available on our website. So maybe we'll just wait one more minute or two, in case there's any last-minute questions, and then maybe we'll close after. So we'll wait one more minute. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions right now, so we'll go ahead and close. Unless Grant, Ian, or Maggie, if you had any last-minute thoughts or anything else you'd like to say, you should all be unmuted now.
Thank you very much for the active participation.
Yes.
We look forward to receiving comments.
Great, and thank you all, Eco Limited team, for your presentations today, and thank you all who joined. We hope that you will send those comments in, and you know, as we've mentioned throughout, we're welcome to hearing those and excited to finalize the framework and the strategy with your input. All right, well, thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and close then.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot.